At the studio of Kitchen Theory, we have William Welch, award-winning industrial designer. William's focus is to create pioneering products that enhance the dining experience inspired by natural forms. Today, we're going to be discussing multisensory flavor perception, in-flight dining, and all things cutlery and crockery. William, thank you so much for joining us in the studio.
You're welcome.
It's awesome to have you here.
It's a great pleasure.
I think the last time you were here, it was having dinner with us, right?
Yeah.
And then I came out to see your wonderful, wonderful new space, which is in...
It's near Moreton in Marsh. So it's an old tithe barn. It's in the middle, literally in the middle of the countryside.
I know, I got lost.
Yeah. 360-degree country
incredible
view for 15 miles.
Yeah.
So rather than having a London-centric food service showroom, it's come out of the countryside, take a deep breath of fresh air, be creative, lots of lovely light and really nice.
And that's really
products.
important, right, for the creative process, is having that kind of a space. I mean, this is why we took the studio here, and everyone said we were in the middle of nowhere coming up to kind of North London. But it is such an important part of kind of for you, for the team, for the people that come to your space. I think it's such an important part of the experience, right?
And you know, we everybody's looking for a different experience, and you know, we have to sort of push it out to a different level, try and engage people, make people consider and think about the things that they do and have around them.
Yeah.
Because you know, if we're not challenging and inviting people to think about things, we won't make progress, really.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think the space, what I found that you have is there's that journey towards it as well, right? It's not just about kind of getting there. It's that kind of discovering it, finding it, and then having it. It's beautifully laid out as well as a space. What are you going to be doing there as activities? I know I'm coming to film something with you there next week, right?
Well, I mean, the idea is that it's a creative studio barn.
Yeah.
From there, we've got a big kitchen and a big long sort of board table, dining table, right in the middle of the kitchen, extends out into the barn, which then joins up with the product. So you can immerse yourself in experiencing different products, in theory, cooking, and experimenting with ingredients, prep of plates, table sizes for food service, dining, restaurant facilities. But I think one of the things that we're learning is that you get the chance to bring up some team members and make it a sort of cultural day for your organization.
Oh, that's cool. So rather than just making it a trip about kind of procuring some cutlery for your business, this becomes a bit more of a kind of an experience of a day trip where you can kind of engage in something that's educational, right?
You're in a restaurant or in a hotel and there's a whole team around you and it's big and everyone is doing everything and they're so busy. To have some stop and think creative times are just really hard to do. So you would try and go and stay at a country hotel or try and find your way out of London maybe to a creative space. So to be with your own kitchen that you can you know, actually be in control of, be with product that's new and exciting. We've got a lot of creative products, a lot of things to challenge the way traditional food is presented and the way it's taken from plate to mouth.
So what is it that got you interested in this kind of more multi-sensory aspects of design? Because, tell us a little bit first about kind of what was your background and what got you interested in this?
So I did my master's degree at the Royal College of Art. One of the best things I've done in my life. I arrived and they said, you know, you've been selected because you're good and you're talented.
Awesome.
And now we want you to forget everything you know and we want you to sort of think out wide. We want you to challenge yourself, challenge the things that the creative things that you're going to get engaged with.
Yeah.
So I then my late father died and I working for my late father's company and I set out back to their company in the Cotswolds to work for them, and then I realized quickly that the working with the family unit wasn't going to work, and so I left.
Sure.
Set up on my own, and that was the best thing I've ever done. So we design and manufacture beautiful, high quality cutlery.
Yeah.
And
it's all the stuff that we use here at our chef's table. It's beautiful stuff.
Thank you very much. I think our company has and is evolving into being a more deeper thinking company rather than just manufacturing products. So I think the benefit of having the creative leader of the company is also the owner of the company means that I can turn to some projects that are maybe less commercial,
sure,
more exciting, more stimulating, and more from the heart.
Okay.
Yeah, because...
And so we met through Professor Spence, didn't we?
Yes.
And there was that kind of, I think what brought us together was this kind of interest in cross-disciplinary collaboration and looking at how that creativity that you're talking about can be drawn from kind of other sources as well. So it's not just about working with other product designers, it's about working with psychologists and chefs and people from other disciplines that has informed your work. What is it that got you interested in that kind of sensory side? Or is that a kind of inherent when you're a designer, that that's something that you're interested in?
Well, I think the ability to develop your experiences come from, and your mental thought process comes from what you do and what you experience in life. So as we started to supply more and more creative chefs, really looking at the high-end market or the fine dining market.
Sure.
Fortunate enough to go and eat at many of these places, I then realized that this tool they're using for this remarkable dish doesn't complement, is not part of the experience. This could be improved. There's room for improvement here. So
because crockery had been evolving for quite a while at that point, right?
Right.
Like as in this idea of what the plateware serves as the kind of artist's kind of
blank canvas,
and we kind of decorate it. We think about all these ways of making the food look delicious and more appetizing and more aesthetically well presented. But I guess you found that the actual implements that we were then using weren't. And
so from chef's art on the plate, as well as being technical with dealing with taste of bittersweet, sour, umami, salty. You've basically, they've got the technical content in the food, then they've created the art, and then from the plate, it has to arrive in your mouth. Yeah. And that's where I come in. So Studio William, we design these sort of fun, additional, extra.
And that's a really intimate
pieces.
part of the experience as well, because that's the thing that's actually taking it from the plate into your mouth. It's the part of the kind of tableware that's actually coming into really kind of a very sensitive part of or cavity, and that's really interesting because how it because we know that different metals can alter how you perceive the flavor, and I think Professor Spence had done some really interesting research on that, looking at different metal spoons, and looking at the influence that could have on your perception of things like saltiness or sweetness, or how it affected the overall flavor. Like
caviar with a horn or a wood spoon, caviar is affected by metals.
Right, there you go, exactly. So then I think that's kind of, we know that can affect it, but the design, I guess, as well is really interesting because the mouthfeel, the texture, the way the implement kind of interacts with your mouth as your kind of,
So we've been experimenting with some textures. So obviously you have a mirror polished traditional stainless steel finish on cutlery.
Yeah.
We do a brush satin finish, which is a favorite of mine, as well as being aesthetic. You have that extra bit of texture, which you can feel on your tongue and on your lips. So, as it goes into your mouth, your lips are very sensitive, and your tongue can pick up on the satin texture as well. And then we've sort of taken it a step further. So imagining a dessert with a crunchy and a smooth and a sweet and a sour level created by chef, and it's looking beautiful on the plate. And we then thought, well, cutlery, let's introduce a textured spoon. So there's a texture on the spoon bowl. I'm just picking up the spoon bowl.
Yeah, by the way, we have
now.
some beautiful cutlery displayed out here. But yeah, that's really cool.
So we've got 4 spoons. The spoons have different textures in the bowl.
Okay.
So as the customer is of the restaurant's going through with the spoon into the dessert, they're picking up the food stuff on the bowl, they deliver it into their mouth, and as the bottom of the tongue and the lips, they will engage with this texture as you
and those really sensitive parts of your kind of mouth where you've got all those nerve endings, and all that is kind of being stimulated not only by the food textures, by the textures in your cutlery.
And we don't really think about that very often, I think.
I don't think anybody has been thinking about that. I don't think it's kind of a common... You see very few people who are looking at that kind of side of it and looking at the importance, because we know things like eating with your hands in certain cultures, they believe it makes food taste better in some way. We know that, the weight of cutlery, that influences people's perception of value and stuff like that. But I think when it comes to texture and people actually looking at how cutlery, how you engage with those implements, I don't think enough people are really giving thought to that.
And we all know daily things like a kiss. You know how sensitive your lips are.
Sure.
So it's lovely that cutlery can take a sort of participation in that, or we can make a piece of cutlery which engages some emotion, which engages us in thinking about what we're doing with an everyday item.
Yeah.
Cutlery for me is interesting. Our parents gave us a knife, fork and spoon when we were very small, and then we sort of started this social etiquette journey of elbows off the table when we're eating, and maybe the parents starting first, and so the very utilitarian functional tools, mainly derived by a handle and a head.
Yeah.
And in the West we have knife, fork and spoon. Yeah. And in the Asia Pacific East we've got chopsticks. Yeah. And our parents gave us these tools. We don't really consider today, amongst all the evolving things around our lives, the evolution of technology and smartphones and convenience activities. Sure. It's sort of very much like laces on shoes. They're sort of things we just have and we take for granted, and sure, we don't often question. So I really like that I can design some extra pieces which can add sort of an experience, make people think about things.
And that's fascinating to think that if you go back, I don't know, maybe back to Victorian times, they had huge cutlery selections, right? They had a spoon or fork or knife for all sorts of different kind of, there'd be things for shellfish, there'd be, as you said, caviar kind of implements, there'd be a different kind of range of knives and
fish knives and forks,
and we've still got a few of those kind of things hanging around. I mean, but why is it that we went from having this huge extensive range of cutlery that was for the haves rather than the have-nots, admittedly, but it kind of all just now has come down to kind of, as you said, a knife, fork and spoon, and there's a few kind of variations out there, but why have we gone from kind of feeling that we required such a wide range of cutlery to only kind of coming down to these?
I think it's a cultural thing. It's an occasion, and dining can be an occasion, and it can be a convenience. So as we go for a quick lunch, it's something that we need to do for fulfilling our human need. We need some food in us. But if we were to meet up for dinner and we make a small journey somewhere and we're meeting up at a certain time, and that might be an occasion. Mm-hmm. And an occasion is a great time to take things on with a bit of theatre, a bit of drama, make it memorable. So I think there was a sense of grandeur brought about by having extended cutlery lines where you have fish knives and forks and different sized cutlery, different shaped heads to suit different functional needs. Yeah. And some of them were justified. escargot, and these things need specific size tools to be able to use them. But the change for us today is that we've moved into different proportions. So
that's an interesting point.
There's an area where the amount of food we can eat can be of a better quality, a smaller amount, 3 or 4, 5 delicious, amazing,
so more delicate kind of implements
juicy
to
moments, and we want to have 3 or 4 or 5 of these courses, and therefore it's not a sort of starter and a main course, which is a sort of a la carte normal restaurateur dining experience. We're into little taster menus, and when you've got a smaller amount of food, but it's crafted and much more refined, the plate size tends to reduce. So therefore, from my perspective as a cutlery designer, the size of the cutlery is also now needing to change. So we have smaller cutlery to suit vessels. So this is what I would kind of call an appetizer fork. So
Lovely.
it's much smaller than a side fork, and when the plates sort of 4 or 5 inches maybe, and the food stuff on the plate from chef is small and great quality. Having a big knife and fork is the cutlery's
totally.
It's gone out of scale.
And it's clumsy as well, and it's no, for sure. You mentioned something really interesting about the whole idea of it being an occasion, and that maybe different occasions warrant the use of different types of cutlery. Now, one place where I would say you probably have, you're obviously hyper aware of cutlery in relation to the food that you're eating. How do you feel about in-flight cutlery? Because it's pretty abysmal, right?
So, well, we've all flown, and I think there's obviously
because you have to go up and to even, I think, is it like business class and first class before it even starts to become metal? I don't know. In economy, is it even?
Well, there was some safety implications for cutlery after 9/11.
Exactly, yeah, and I remember that's when it got even worse.
Yeah, so I designed safety cutlery for airlines. So we have specific requirements for fork tine length and blades that have to be rounded on the end.
Sure.
But in the air, I'm not an expert at this, but my knowledge is that we have different taste and olfactory experiences. So
the altitude, the noise of the engines. It's even said that the noise of the engines is at about 80 decibels, and that can suppress physiologically. That can suppress your ability to perceive saltiness and sweetness.
Right, and the air conditioning is also in effect. So, I do a lot of flying around the world. So I'm sort of brand ambassador for Studio Williams. So part of my life is on a plane. And what I've now noticed is, when I'm flying in the older fleet, so like a 747, the air quality is completely different. And when I get off a long haul flight, I feel groggy. My sinuses are all over the shop, almost on the edge of a cold, and it's because they're recycling the air for 12, 13 hours. So the new generation of planes, so I think BA is taking on a new Airbus 350, 1000, or something like that. Not too knowledgeable on the fleet, but one of its great attributes is that it's taking in new air regularly and exhausting old air from the cabin.
Okay.
So now the customers are actually getting a much more purified air intake in the.
That should help with even the flavor kind of perception. Admittedly, the altitude, because at 35,000 feet, the altitude makes it really hard as well for your sinus, for you to be able to perceive the aromas of food. So that really inhibits your ability to perceive flavor. But how can cutlery help with it? Because they've tried everything. BA had tried soundscapes, like headphones where you listen to certain soundscapes or pieces of music that are matched up to certain dishes on the menu. They tried that, I think, years ago, looking at kind of that sonic seasoning kind of idea that Professor Spence talks about. But I think there might be something there as well in the cutlery, right?
So we currently supply 3 airlines.
Okay.
We supply Etihad, Saudia, and more recently British Airways, first class in all of them, and business in Saudi. Yeah.
And do first class have the same restrictions on the cutlery design, or does it all get, well, in first class, no one's, here to harm the rest?
I'm going to say yes. I think what is lovely is that the brands have identified that a lot of their demographics are staying in great hotels around the world. They're eating in great restaurants.
Exactly, sure.
And it's almost like a hotel.
And when you're on board for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours, food becomes a really important part of your experience, right? It's the, maybe food and the on-board entertainment system are your kind of the saving grace of the whole experience if they get it right. But, how are they getting it right?
So in my design, you've got some considerations with elbows and maybe a slightly more raised table height.
Oh, okay.
There's some functional ergonomic design elements which are incorporated in my cutlery designs for on board. So you have a general wish to not flail elbows around.
Sure.
So you're kind of my blade on British Airways is a curvy blade so that you can come in with a nice rocking action,
right,
as well as having a lot of personality when laid out on the table before the customer dines. It's got great functionality. And then the fork head is more slender, and that's one of the characteristics across Studio Williams' cutlery design portfolio is that we have more slender fork heads. So the purpose of the slender fork head is that we're trying to make a more elegant delivery from plate surface to the mouth.
Okay.
And so us guys will be sort of lunchtime. I'm starving. I haven't eaten. I could eat a horse. Sort of thing. The old sayings. And we there's a sort of male thing. We grab the biggest utensil out of the drawer, and it's like, I've got to rush. And what happens is that the knock-on effect is indigestion, basically, because you've eaten too quickly. It's almost not been masticated in the mouth enough. It's just swallowed, partly chewed up. And so your digestive process has a big journey to do, and you'll feel discomfort. So my hope and wish is that the smaller food on the fork goes into the mouth, and you have more slower, regular delivery into the mouth.
That makes sense. I can see how that works.
Then essentially you're lucky enough to have a inclining seat on the plane, and you can sort of lay back and sleep comfortably, on a plane.
That's interesting. So in your cutlery design, you're factoring in not only people's kind of the space that they're in, but also, I guess, their comfort. So how can cutlery help with, reducing digestion, or indigestion?
And if you think about it from the brand perspective of a hotel, they go and invest in the most fantastic, super soft, special bed with mattress
and
toppers and 1,000 count and
way too many pillows
and they're
cushions.
Working on perhaps the scent of the room and the furnishings of the room to make you feel comforted and warm and cozy, and you're going to have the best night's sleep in our brand. And then you've come upstairs after hoovering down food, and you're laying in bed and your stomach's gurgling and you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, and it might take you hours to get to sleep. So if you could subconsciously get your customer into bed with their stomach in a nice equilibrium of comfort, there's a good chance you can get them to have a great night of sleep in your
I think that's so cool that you're thinking about that. That's awesome. No, but that really is thinking about the whole user journey, right? That's the whole idea of kind of really thinking about not kind of where does one part start and one part end. It's about this seamless experience. And it is these little design elements that enhance that experience in some way, for sure.
And cutlery's a total unsung hero. It's a necessity, as in with the chef, they'll be buying a plate. They'll
Yeah.
be looking for my canvas to display my art.
Oh, definitely.
Or it might be a bowl
for
because
sure.
I need something functional for soup.
Yeah.
The sommelier, the bar manager buying the drinks, and they'll need certain vessels to deliver olfactory through the shapes of the vessels, the bowls or the glasses.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of passion there, and we need to spend money there.
That's a good point.
And then everyone goes, oh no, we haven't got any money for cutlery. We've spent it all on this all this beautiful tableware we've got. So,
so who would that be then? That would be the front of house manager, right?
No, it's the same
maitre
people.
d'. It would be.
It's the same. The F&B manager and exec chef, and
you need to excite them
yeah.
about that.
So
that
we have a lot of character in the shapes
part.
of our cutlery design. So I design a knife, a fork, and a spoon.
Yeah.
The three pieces are really important for me. So they're a family. They have a relationship together when they're laid on the table, and it's always the knife that is the uncomfortable member of the team. So because the knife lays down, and it's long and has this big sort of flat blade which has to be purposeful and do some cutting, the fork and spoon look like brother and sister, but the knife doesn't look like part of the family.
I get that. I understand. Yeah, okay.
And probably now that I've told you that, you'll look at cutlery
No, but
differently.
I kind of have realized when you lay out cutlery, I get that. I've never put it in that way, but I do understand what you mean. Yeah.
So
okay.
I really try to design the knife, fork, and spoon as a family, and 0.25 of a millimeter on the.
So it's not just making sure they have the same handle, making sure they have the same kind of overall look. It's much more than that. Right?
And that's really where cutlery has come from in the past. Is handles, shapes.
Yeah.
And utensil heads just a functional part of it all.
Yeah.
But actually, that goes in your mouth.
I agree. Yeah.
And we all have different sized mouths. A lady might have a much smaller mouth than a guy's. So often I will get a favorite request, which is the guys are using a table knife and fork, and the girls are using a side knife and fork. And it's partly to do with the size of their hands and the size of the head and what they want to engage with to put in their mouth.
That's really interesting. Thinking about the scale and proportion of people's cutlery in relation to their hand size, because it's interesting. The whole idea of the heavier cutlery is the more. I think again, this is some research that come out of Oxford, which was the heavier cutlery is the more people enjoyed their meal, and that the heavier the cutlery was, the more they would pay for the meal.
Yes. So the weight of the cutlery directly affects the perceived value of the quality of the food. So if you were to give
So have you thought of lining this all with lead or something? Or
so I can design cutlery heavier than it is now from Studio William.
But I like the kind of light delicacy as well with cutlery.
Yeah, there's a purpose to, there's a nice balance between too heavy and being light.
Yeah.
So, a really nice...
Because I was looking at that little one and I was thinking, actually, that really, for its size, it's got a really good weight to it. And that sits perfectly. That's a really nice...
And in scale
kind of
with its plate, it has the balance of the event.
Yeah.
And when we go to a bigger plate, so this is a 5mm sheet steel fork, you've got lovely round soft edges. When you put it in your hand, it's very emotive. Yeah. It's very comfortable.
That is lovely.
It's
That's
just
got a really, really nice
a pleasure to hold. But the thing is, I could make that heavier, but it would then start to have problems. So you'd start to feel too heavy. You'd start to fall off plates. There'd be lots of considerations which people might not necessarily have thought about. But back to the weight of the food, this sort of 5mm product as opposed to a thin, cheap cutlery. Yeah. It gives you a perceived, you feel like you're eating better quality food. So for a restaurateur and a hotel, if they've got cutlery of nice weight and nice balance, an average dish can taste that little bit better.
Sure.
The customer doesn't realise it.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely agree with that. And you've mentioned a word there about kind of emotive. And this piece is probably one of the most commented upon pieces of cutlery we have ever owned at the chef's table in terms of people are really intrigued by what do we call this?
So this is Leaf. It's part of the Studio William portfolio. It's designed by a jewelry designer called Annabelle Chan. And we did a college project at the Royal College of Art, Birmingham and Edinburgh. And we put together a design competition to design a new tool for desserts. So the aim was to make a challenging tool for delivery of desserts.
Yeah.
So what I loved about this was the cultural, as well as having the challenges which I'll talk about now. It also has a cultural relationship. In Thailand you would use a leaf to eat with. So
Okay.
For those that don't have are not seeing this, I'm holding a stainless steel leaf now. This is.
I will probably flash a picture of it up so they can see what we're talking about.
The idea is that you hold this end, and it can rock like a mezzaluna knife to cut, say, biscuit-based tart.
Okay.
You can prong for fruit.
Yeah.
And then you can scoop for a mousse.
Right.
And you bring it up to your mouth and you eat with it. And it's not a knife, a fork, a spoon, a chopsticks. And it's wonderful because it engages us as humans
I agree.
back to thinking about what we do best, which is adapting and becoming, the intelligent mammals that we are on this planet.
Totally. And this is why we don't own any forks at the chef's table. And this is why we've got a whole range of your lovely cutlery, but we didn't actually go away with any forks. And the reason that we did that was using the culinary tweezers, using the different kind of shapes of spoons and utensils and the leaf and these kind of elements. The whole kind of thinking for us was we present these kind of labors of love to 10 courses that we are really, passionate about. We put loads of thought into. You put the dish down in front of the diners. They'll look at it, Instagram it, send it to their friends, and then once they've taken it in, they'll just kind of, devour the dish or eat the dish, even if it's at a kind of leisurely pace, but without really thinking about how they're engaging with it, thinking about how they actually... The moment you remove that fork, all of a sudden it becomes much more mindful.
Yes.
And people completely change how they interact, how they scoop things, how they prong things, it becomes, and we've had so many people say, because of doing this, they've said, now I kind of get how my kid feels when I'm kind of, constantly going on about them about kind of table manners and using their knife and fork properly and all these things that we, as adults, just completely take for granted, how we interact with food and how we actually kind of, and not just what's on the food, how we feel about it in our mouth, but the actual act of engaging with the food on the plate. And this is where this plays a huge role in that.
Your restaurant experience here is all about multisensory. It's all about engaging people's perceptions, their historical mind path, their database of journey they've done in life.
Definitely.
Exploring things they don't understand.
Yeah.
Well,
that they take for granted, and it's just the idea that we perceive flavor and taste in the mind, and we take it for granted. We just kind of, until you lose one of your senses or one of them is dulled, or as we age, we're all heading in that direction where the senses are in some way kind of, being dulled. But it's these elements of it that I think we take for granted that are so important, and especially when we are talking about that kind of, not just even fine dining, but about food experiences. And I think, extending this even to looking at, how children interact with food, how the elderly interact with food. And, how can we make that process more mindful or more engaging or more interesting or,
I mean, my understanding is as we get older, we lose the abilities, everything reduces in terms of taste receptors and olfactory.
Definitely.
So, a bit like being on board aircraft, we've got to think about enhancing, flavors. And,
I agree.
For retirement homes, you've got to engage customers. You've got to, not customers, the residents. That's it.
Yeah.
You've got to engage the residents with, food that's going to stimulate them and feel excited.
Yeah,
Maybe
totally, because you have as well, on both sides of the spectrum. So you have with children, there's all sorts of kind of issues that we could be looking at in terms of how they engage with foods.
Concentration being one of them.
Yeah, totally. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the elderly, where there's a huge problem with malnutrition, and in some cases quite a substantial loss of appetite that leads to weight loss, and that's not coming at a good time in life. So you finding meaningful, interesting ways of changing these food experiences through these kind of, and it's not all about, I guess, elements that really it's not about kind of dry ice pouring out over the table to engage people, but it is about these kind of sensory touch points at every kind of step of the journey.
One of the areas in cutlery is there's some physical requirements. So Parkinson's, as an example, you've got shaking hands. So the weight of the cutlery is really important, because having something with some weight in it gives some stability in the hand. Yeah. So you're not shaking as much, so you're able to control. You may want a slightly bigger head, because your hand's shaking and you want to keep food stuff on the fork. Right. There may be, so this is quite an interesting idea for aging population, and you've got a kind of, it's a knife. So
this is like a really classy sport, right? This is the
but you
king
want
of
to be
sports.
Classy still. You don't want to have a gardening
And I was thinking,
tool.
yes,
really
I agree.
Important.
Yeah. I was thinking you don't want something that looks like a medical implement, right?
Aspirational. Stay like you still.
Don't compromise, and the moment it starts feeling like a medical aid.
You're on a downward spiral then, if you've given up. So you can rock here to cut. You've got a spoon for scooping and a prongs for picking up food. And
that's super cool.
it's quite interesting. It's a full-size piece of cutlery.
That's lovely.
And but let's say you've only got one arm. You may have lost an arm, or you might have restriction or a stroke. Sure. And you've lost ability to move one arm. Yeah. To have a cutlery tool, which is a knife, fork, and spoon, makes you be able to live life. Still, you've got functionality to do everything you need.
Again, and it's thinking about those little things with the quality of life. You mentioned something actually, which is about the whole dulling of senses, and you were saying that's kind of, as we're aging, we were saying, that's kind of similar to when you're on an airplane kind of thing. Funnily enough, I was speaking to some researchers, and they had mentioned the idea that exploring some of the ideas about multisensory flavor perception in space, so understanding the restrictions and how inhibited maybe your sense of smell, and your senses are kind of a bit upside down because of the space environment that you're in. And now, because of space tourism, there's this whole kind of interest in how, astronauts will go up to space and eat freeze-dried foods and pouches of, kind of rehydrated foods, and they're absolutely fine with it. But once you start paying hundreds of thousands of millions to go up in space, you want something a little bit better than that. And once space tourism, we're kind of on the cusp of it. And I'm not saying it's, around the